Alexander Jones, a young gold digger, decided to marry an elderly wealthy woman to pull off a scam and take all her money. However, he underestimated the elderly lady and failed to learn the valuable lesson she had to teach. At 23, Alexander avoided any responsibility. Raised in the comfort provided by his parents, he refused to follow the traditional path of work. Forced to face reality when his parents cut off his allowance, Alexander managed to get a job at a cafe, where his careless attitude was evident. Unable to find contentment in the simple life he led, Alexander longed for luxury and extravagance. However, his bank account was always empty as he hesitated to spend the little he earned. Trusting in the generosity of others to sustain his lifestyle, he found himself constantly at the mercy of luck. His routine was monotonous, going from home to work and from work to home. However, everything changed when an unexpected client entered the cafe where he worked. Alexander was used to serving ordinary workers, people who grabbed their coffee and left quickly. But this client was different. A luxury car parked in front of the cafe, and the driver opened the door for his employer. A woman with white hair and wrinkles on her skin gracefully stepped out of the car, showing that she didn't mind displaying her age. She was well-dressed and entered the cafe, waiting her turn in line. Alexander, busy serving customers, suddenly looked up and came face to face with the sophisticated lady, immediately realizing that she was not an ordinary customer. In a moment of pure efficiency, Alexander surprised everyone by processing the order and delivering it personally. His performance was beyond the ordinary, indicating a skill that had remained hidden until then. As he handed out the drinks, he skillfully flirted lightly, captivating the lady with his boldness. "You know, I see that you are clearly a businesswoman. I wonder if you could give me an opportunity. I accept any role that can help me advance in a career. I feel like I'm limiting myself here," Alexander said, looking into the woman's eyes. The lady, surprised by the unexpected proposal, recognized the determination in Alexander's eyes and decided to offer him a chance. With delicacy, she took a business card from her purse and handed it to him before leaving. The card displayed her name and business phone number. Excited about the opportunity, Alexander felt a renewed hope for his future. The next morning, Alexander didn't hesitate to call the provided number. "Office of Mrs. Ava. How may I assist you?" a voice answered on the other end of the line. Alexander explained his situation, and the secretary confirmed that she was already aware of the situation and was expecting his call. An interview was scheduled for the following day at 4 p.m. The next day, Alexander attended the interview, demonstrating his commitment by arriving before the scheduled time. He managed to catch the attention of Mrs. Ava, who normally didn't conduct interviews personally. Impressed by his determination and communication skills, she decided to make an exception. Convinced of his potential, she hired him for the sales department, tasked with prospecting corporate clients door to door. The lady, an adept businesswoman, led a renowned network of sports equipment, although she had never had an interest in the field. About 13 years ago, when her husband passed away, leaving her the entire empire, she took control. Despite her inexperience, the company thrived under her management, sparking speculation about her alleged innate talent for business. Alexander, observing the old photos on Mrs. Ava's wall next to a man who appeared to be his age, deduced part of the story. He noticed the absence of a ring on her finger, and judging by her appearance, estimated that she was over 70 years old. Driven by greed, he devised a plan to seduce and marry her, aiming to inherit her fortune after her eventual death. Without remorse, Alexander was determined to manipulate and lie to achieve his goals. For him, the end justified the means, and what mattered was status and money. His plan began to bear fruit when, surprisingly, he brought 2 major clients to the company, impressing everyone, including Mrs. Ava. With his manipulative skills and captivating appearance, Alexander could persuade people around him, shaping situations according to his desires. The lucrative contracts he sealed were well received by Mrs. Ava, who decided to reward him by taking him to dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants as an incentive for him to continue his good work. On that dinner night, Alexander played his role masterfully, engaging the lady with his charms and compliments. It didn't take long for her to succumb to his flirtations, nurturing an ever-deepening connection. During the meal, they exchanged stories. Alexander invented a tale of struggles and triumphs, while Mrs. Ava shared memories of adventures with her late husband and the building of her business empire. A few weeks later, as they continued to occasionally go out and get to know each other better, the young man decided to take a risk and go all in. Alexander chose the right moment and asked his boss out on a date. Mrs. Ava's face showed astonishment and surprise. Although they went out fairly often, he had always been very respectful and hadn't even tried to kiss her. So, a request for a date was quite surprising. She tried to resist and say that it would be absurd for a boss to date an employee, but Alexander and his strong persuasive power managed to elicit a yes as a final answer. The old lady was surprised that a young man like him wanted to be with an elderly woman like her. But she was so happy that she didn't even dwell on it, just accepted the proposal and celebrated throughout the night. While Alexander celebrated his progress, he knew that the next step would require extreme subtlety and care to avoid arousing suspicions about his true intentions. Are you enjoying the story? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Alexander dove headfirst into his relationship with Mrs. Ava, introducing her to places she had never imagined visiting. With care and affection, he guided her through unfamiliar tourist spots and places he himself wished to explore. The young man's involvement sparked a deep love in the elderly lady, who felt rejuvenated in his company, experiencing a new essence of life. Mrs. Ava, previously isolated in her grief and business affairs, found a rebirth alongside Alexander. Her late husband, more devoted to business than to family, left her lonely and without heirs. Now, she found herself rediscovering happiness with the young man. Determined to break from routine, Mrs. Ava planned an unusual extravagance, renting the city's best penthouse for a weekend, keeping the occasion a secret from Alexander. The surprise began when he arrived by helicopter. Experiencing his first flight amidst the breathtaking scenery, Mrs. Ava made a bold decision to propose to Alexander. Her proposal caught the young man off guard, but his answer was a resounding yes, flooding the elderly lady's eyes with tears of joy. The speed with which her plan succeeded surprised Alexander. Although Mrs. Ava noticed his rude attitude towards a hotel employee, a warning sign for her upcoming actions. However, what she hadn't truly noticed was the amount of money he spent every week on frivolous items. Since he began dating Mrs. Ava, the man had been dressed in designer clothes and watches that looked more like jewelry. He already walked and behaved as if he were a true millionaire, seemingly adapting to the luxurious lifestyle without any hindrance. On the contrary, anyone looking from the outside would even think that Alexander was born and raised in this lifestyle. Despite everything, the marriage of the young man to Ava was simple, with no party or anything of the sort, just a small dinner at her house. Despite the simplicity of the wedding, Alexander's exorbitant expenses caught the attention of the bank manager. Upon contacting Mrs. Ava to confirm the veracity of the transactions, Ava began to harbor suspicions about her new husband's true intentions. Alexander's long phone calls and frequent absences began to fuel the elderly lady's apprehension, as she found herself consumed by uncertainty about his true motives. Plagued by the fear of being deceived, Mrs. Ava found herself confronted with the possibility of having made a mistake in marrying the young man. Had the elderly lady made a mistake in marrying the young man? Share your opinion here in the comments. Determined to uncover the truth behind the suspicions that haunted her, Mrs. Ava turned to a private detective recommended by a friend. For weeks, the investigator followed Alexander's footsteps, meticulously documenting his daily activities. Upon receiving the final report, Mrs. Ava was shocked by the revelations. It was discovered that Alexander had not only been transferred to another branch of the company months ago, but had also stopped showing up for work a few weeks ago. Under the pretext of going to work, he was actually meeting with another woman, attending parties and luxurious restaurants. Furthermore, he used the company's resources to lavish his mistress with extravagant gifts. Faced with the cruel evidence, the tears flooding the elderly lady's face were insignificant compared to the expression of disillusionment etched on her countenance. All the trust she had placed in Alexander had crumbled, leaving her feeling more used and deceived than ever before. How could he do this to me? To say he loved me in one moment and go out to betray me with a younger woman in another, she thought to herself, reflecting on how naive she had been and how blinded she was by the passion and illusion of a handsome young man. Amid thoughts of disbelief and sadness, Mrs. Ava questioned how Alexander could have betrayed her so cruelly. Recognizing her own naivety and the blinding power of love, She was determined not to let the opportunist escape unpunished. Conspiring silently to seek revenge, she vowed not to let the incident go unnoticed. What would you do if you were in Mrs. Ava's place? Share in the comments. After discovering Alexander's betrayal, Mrs. Ava took immediate action to retaliate. First, she blocked all his personal credit cards and discreetly disconnected him from the company without warning. When Alexander attempted to pay for a dinner with his mistress and had his card declined repeatedly, he tried to downplay the situation, blaming the provider and the restaurant staff, and handing over another card. 3 attempts later, the embarrassment and tension made the atmosphere heavy. I bet this is due to some incompetence of yours. You know, if you worked for my company, you'd be out on the street right now, Alexander said to the humble and friendly waiter, who simply apologized and said he would be right back. Upon his return, he brought with him the manager of the establishment, who asked if the man had any cash to pay since his cards were clearly having issues. The young man tried calling his wife, Mrs. Ava, but she didn't answer the phone at all, leaving him alone in that situation. After the threat of calling the police and the risk of spending a night in jail, Alexander left his documents and cell phone with the manager and promised to return the next day to settle the bill. To avoid further embarrassment in the crowded restaurant, the manager accepted. The young man was furious. He didn't understand what had happened, but in his mind, his plan was still working perfectly and going exactly as he wanted. So, he tried to move on and just resolve the situation as best as possible. Back at home, he confronted his wife about the incident, but she denied any knowledge, attributing the occurrence to a supposed banking issue and promising to resolve it the next day. Despite Alexander's frustration, he was determined to maintain his facade while trying to deal with the situation as best as possible. Alexander struggled to contain his boiling anger. In that moment, Mrs. Ava saw, without the enchantment of the beginning of their relationship, the true Alexander. She saw his true intentions and realized that he would not escape unpunished for his lies and betrayals. The next day, she did go to the bank, not to resolve the problem with the credit card, but to amend her marriage and inheritance contract. With no children and her family deceased, there had always been speculations about the fate of her wealth and business empire, which were now kept confidential between her, her lawyer, and her bank manager. Unfortunately, her vengeful plan was interrupted by a sudden death. Only a few closest employees knew. But Ava had been battling cancer for about 3 years, and after this great disappointment, her body couldn't take it anymore, and she passed away. She departed to the other side feeling betrayed by the last person she trusted, but knowing she was about to say goodbye forever, she left a letter with her faithful driver, bidding her final farewell and giving him her last instructions. After his wife's death, Alexander adopted the posture of a grieving widower. Dressed in an expensive black suit and sunglasses to hide the absence of tears in his eyes. The reading of the will took place during the wake, as requested in Ava's letter. The venue was crowded with company employees and shareholders concerned about the future of the business. The will began with acknowledgments for everyone's presence, stating that now, at least, she would have true happiness, reunited with her late husband in the afterlife, which caused an uncomfortable atmosphere for Alexander, as everyone stared at him. As for the company, it would be divided equally among all current shareholders, highlighting the constant assistance they provided to the elderly woman. Thanks to the board's guidance and wise decisions, the company thrived, becoming more powerful and stronger than ever after the founder's departure. She fully trusted that they would continue to lead the company with excellence. As for the fortune, it was revealed that the amounts in her account were much larger than imagined. Despite many considering her innocent and uninformed, over the years she had proven to be a skilled investor, making significant profits from investments and sales of other companies she helped found. All this money would be destined for the creation of an NGO, responsible for sheltering homeless children, ensuring not only their basic needs until the age of 18, but also providing support for their education in renowned universities and job opportunities in one of the founders' companies. Alexander's expression of hatred and fury returned to his face as the will was read. Outraged at not receiving part of the company or the fortune, he eagerly awaited the fate of the cars and properties, which were worth more than he could spend in a lifetime. However, to his surprise, all these assets would be sold, and the money raised would be donated to existing charities. When the will finally mentions Alexander, a great gratitude begins. The deceased Mrs. Ava makes it clear the importance of the man in her final years, as she said that thanks to him, She experienced incredible and unusual experiences, saw beautiful places, and had contact with things and people she didn't even know existed. And for that, she thanked him. Mrs. Ava also said that she believed she had also made the man very happy, and for that reason, she had left him one of the most important items she could leave. He received a key, which, according to the will, would lead to a safe deposit box in the country's most renowned bank. A cynical smile appeared on Alexander's face. Finally, he believed he would inherit a collection of jewelry or property deeds. All the guests applauded in a final tribute to Ava and assumed that Alexander probably took the largest share of her inheritance. Days passed, and with the sale of the properties and cars, Alexander decided to go to the bank at once to check his long-awaited inheritance. He was welcomed warmly by the manager, who mentioned that everyone was eagerly awaiting his presence. The young man was escorted to the vault on the most secure floor of the building, and as a measure of privacy, the employees left him alone in the room, exiting and asking him to call them when he was ready to leave. Alexander's overwhelming anxiety drove him to open the steel vault as quickly as possible, expecting diamonds and other jewels. But what he saw inside made him almost stagger backward. Inside the safe was a cup of espresso, the same one Alexander had served Mrs. Ava on the day they met. The drink was already cold and accompanied by a mere note that said, "Hope you enjoy the bitter taste. With love, your late wife." The young man instantly understood the message. She knew his plan. She had always known. She had left that cup of coffee as a mockery for Alexander, a way to give her response to everything he had done, all his lies and betrayals, resulting in immense frustration and a coffee without sugar. The young man couldn't believe it. He was exactly where he had started, without money and without a job. He was devastated. He cried and screamed simultaneously, unsure of what to do next. Everyone had seen through his deceit. He became known throughout the city after the embarrassment he had caused and never managed to achieve the social ascent he desired. Not even the cafeteria where he worked wanted him back. Mrs. Ava died happy, remembering that she had already found her soulmate in her life, her late husband, and that Alexander had been nothing more than an opportunist who, in the end, didn't get what he wanted. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like, and this other story that's appearing on the screen now will likely touch your heart too. Enjoy the session, and see you in the next video.